Hey, hello everyone and welcome to Extreme Graphics Tech. My name is Angelo and on today's videos we are going to the other end of the spectrum. What I mean by that is that a couple of days ago I made a video about the legendary 1080 Ti, a GPU with 11 gigabytes of VRAM that has aged so good that I think is Nvidia's biggest mistake. However, today we're going to the other side of the spectrum and we are going to be testing a low-end GPU. In this case, I'm talking about the 1050 Ti, which it was the entry-level gaming for that series of GPUs. It was a decent one, just, it had to fill the gap between the 750 Ti and the GTX 1060. And the 750 Ti at the time, it was considered a very, entry-level GPU. And at the time, the 1050 Ti was actually pretty decent, for the price and everything. But the question is, how has this GPU aged in 2024? Is there any use for this one? And in this video I want to answer two questions, because the first one is that, as you know, this is a low-end GPU, but the biggest question I have is 4 gigabytes enough for gaming? Because we have this narrative now that 8 gigabytes is not enough, you cannot play, it's unplayable, it's bad, you shouldn't have a 8 gigabyte VRAM card, right? Which, as I showed before, I don't agree with. Okay, but I agree with the fact that, for example, a 4060 for the price should have at least 12 gigabytes. But that is a different narrative. It's the price ratio VRAM performance thing that we're discussing there. But the other question is 8 gigabytes enough for gaming? Yes or no? So you know my answer to that. If you don't, then look on my videos. I have one testing 8 gigabytes of VRAM. But now the question is, what about 4 gigabytes? And what about the 1050 Ti on 2024? But before we get to the benchmark, I have to remind you that, this channel is growing little by little, and I appreciate every and each one of you that has clicked on that subscribe button. However, I have to say that 80% of the people watching the channel, and I'm not making this up, are not subscribed to the channel, and you will do me a great favor if you click on that subscribe button, and especially if you also click on the bell and on the like button. Is free and you will be helping me. Do it now, because then you forget and then you don't do it. Just do it, okay? Please, thank you. So having said that, let's go to the benchmarks. Okay, let's start with Spider-Man Miles Morales. And on this game, if you limit 30 FPS, you can get a very decent gameplay experience, 1080p, FSR quality, medium preset, and you will have, what I will call console settings, sort of, and you will really have a nice experience. This is not a game where you're going to get to 60 FPS without having to sacrifice a lot of visual fidelity, and even then it's not going to be stable at any point. So I wouldn't go that far as to play this game in those settings. So this is a decent start, right? And we are not seeing any issues whatsoever with the 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Now another game that has some years, but I always test, as you know, and I love it, is Dying Light 2. So in this case, I didn't cap the frame rate, I just wanted to see how much we can get. And once again, 1080p, FSR quality, medium preset, not bad for a game that has a couple of years in the market, and you can have a nice experience once again. And in this case, even a medium, I'm not seeing major issues when it comes to VRAM utilizations. You can see it's only 2.5 used and all 4 being used. So yeah, I didn't see any texture, appearance, or anything wrong. So far the 4 gigabytes seems not to be a problem. It's more the performance of the GPU in this case that we have to mostly play at 30 FPS, as is revealed again in Ghost of Tsushima, one of the most recent games that I am testing. But even here, 4 gigabytes don't seem to be an issue, but more of an issue of performance. And now, once again, we got 1080p. In this case, I'm using EXS balance because I think it produces a better image, but also to show you that it's possible to play with XeSS on a 1050 Ti. And once again, we are using the medium preset. Once again, we have to limit this to 30 FPS because this game, if you want to get to 60, is going to require a lot of sacrifice, which I don't think you should do. I think this is more than playable and good enough if you have a 1050 Ti. Hogwarts Legacy is running, well, it's a little bit all over the place, but it's around 30 FPS, but the frame time is a little bit sketchy. However, one of the things I wanted to test the most with this one is moving fast, because it's an Unreal Engine game. We know that it had some issues with textures before and going from the outside to the inside, and as you can see, there are some textures appearing here and there, and sometimes the light, the light takes a little bit to appear, or some shadows, as you're going to see right now. Look, and then we go, now we have some light. But other than that, there wasn't a big issue, so I don't think the 4 GB of VRAM are really that worrisome. You know, if you have to just wait half a second for things to appear, I don't think that should be considered a big problem. You know, the big problem is your GPU, but 4 GB okay. So Horizon Forbidden West, I think, is the first game that I will call non-playable on a 1050 Ti, and even so, you saw some FPS going up to 50. Look at this, we are playing at 900p FSR balance, low preset, and we are going down under 30 FPS. And it's one thing to play something at 60 FPS and going even as low as 40, because it's still playable, even it's not smooth. But going from 30 to 25 to 20, I don't consider that playable, especially because we are already playing at 900p with FSR balance on low preset, and still the game doesn't give us a smooth performance. Having said that, when I tested that game, I was expecting worse for The Last of Us Part 1, but I have to say that it's not as bad as I thought, and actually it's quite playable. 30 FPS, again, 1080p FSR quality on low preset. And this was a game that was, you know, considered to need a lot of memory, and that you couldn't play without 8 and so on, and that's, once again, is not the case. As you can see here, there are no really big issues due to the VRAM. It's always due to the performance of the actual GPU. The VRAM is working okay, there is no textures appearing, and I couldn't see anything. Of course, I'm playing at low, but that's part of you setting up the game. Now, Starfield, this is a game that, yes, I couldn't get 30 FPS no matter what without activating frame generation. Yes, we are using frame generation to go from 16 to around 30 FPS, and it's one of the few games where frame generation actually help, because on the others it will have a regression. And I have to say, I wouldn't recommend anyone playing like this, but if you have no alternative, it's better than I thought it will be, and it feels better than I thought. It's not something I will play personally, but honestly, it is playable, even though you can feel the lag. I think, you know, I have seen worse situations, and will allow you to play in this using 1080p FSR 50%. Alan Wake 2, well, there is nothing that's gonna save this game on the 1050 Ti. We're playing here at 720p FSR Ultra Performance, lowest preset, because I move every single settings to the lowest possible, and still you don't get to 30 FPS. And what's funny is that I even set the game at 640 by 480, and even then I could not get 30 FPS. So I don't know what it is. It's not about resolution, but this game won't run at 30 FPS no matter what. And well, you see already, even at this, it's already looking horrendous. So there is no way I would recommend anyone to play something like this on a 1050 Ti. And another game that had the same issues, same settings, and I lower everything manually, is Avatar. Once again, we're playing 720p, lowest preset, FSR Ultra Performance, and no, there was absolutely no way to get even to a stable 30 FPS. So this is one of those games that I would not recommend. In these games, I don't know if this is related with the settings, but I think the 4 GB of VRAM does cause some issues. Okay, where some things will take a while to load. As you can see, it would take more than I would consider playable. Okay, so I asked two questions. The first one is, how good is the 1050 Ti in 2024? The second is 4 GB of VRAM enough to play in 2024? And I'm going to start by answering the second question first. So, is 4 GB of VRAM enough? So, on my testing of the 1050 Ti, I think I didn't have really issues with the fact that there were only 4 GB of VRAM. And when I say issues, evidently I'm talking about stuttering or hang-ups because the game was trying to do swap data between RAM and VRAM and so on. And I can't say that I found any of that during my gameplay. Of course, the games were set and configured in low or medium settings at best. So that means that obviously I'm not going to be using as much VRAM because I'm setting the game very, very low. But that's the whole point of gaming and settings, that you can set the configuration as exactly as your hardware will allow you to. So when setting the game, properly, I don't think 4 GB is actually a big issue. Also because I don't know if Nvidia managed very well the VRAM, but some games that normally you will see using 6 or 8 GB of VRAM were using only like 3 GB of VRAM in this case. Okay, and so there has to be something that Nvidia is doing there, managing the VRAM and allocations and so on, prioritizing what data is more important or whatever. But the fact is, of course, if I had set the games at ultra or high, the 4 GB of VRAM would probably have been a big issue, okay? And we're talking AAA games here and not testing like esports games. So I can't say that the 4 GB of VRAM were a problem. There were some issues maybe with some textures taking a second or two longer to load and so on, but I never found that distracting or that it was happening constantly. So I wouldn't recommend anyone, and I want this to be clear, to buy a 4 GB of VRAM GPU in 2024, okay? But with the narrative that 8 GB is not enough to play, it bothers me because it makes you look or make you spend money on things that you don't actually really need. For example, if you have a 3070, you have a 2070, a 2880 Super or something like that, which come with 8 GB of VRAM, I think as long as you know how to set the game, you are still going to have a lot of performance out of those GPU. I'm not justifying a 4060 coming with 8 GB. I want to be clear because I don't think it's good value. But what I'm saying is, if you already have an 8 GB of VRAM, you don't need to run and buy a new 12 GB or something because, oh my god, you cannot play anything. At least that's my point of view. So even with 4 GB of VRAM, I couldn't say that if you set the game right, it will work bad, because actually it went better than I expected on that sense. But the second question is the GTX 1050 Ti still good or enough in 2024? And anyone who has been a subscriber of this channel knows that I always try to look at the best case for GPU, because each country is different, and what may be not good for me in terms of price, value, performance, it may be in another place, because if they make $200 or $100 a month and the GPU is going to cost you $100, then it's taking half of your earning or maybe all of it just to buy a GPU. So each situation is very different. But this is the first time I find that I cannot recommend a GTX 1050 Ti in 2024. And I'm not saying if you have one is bad. I'm saying that if you are going to be looking to buy one, don't. Nobody should be buying the 1050 Ti in 2024 unless, and this is the only situation where I can see this being useful, is if you want like an HTPC, just a computer to watch movies, or a computer to play retro games, emulation, that sort of things, like, not very modern, not PlayStation 3 era, but like more Dolphin, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1, and arcade things like that. Because this card doesn't even need a power connector, so it takes all the power from the motherboard. So you can build a very cheap HTPC, which will be very good with this GPU. You will have everything you need, HDMI and everything. And for emulation, it would be great, and you don't need to spend too much, because this card maybe is cheap in your country, but the computer that needs to be run doesn't even need to be, very full spec, have a big power supply or anything like that. That's the only reason I would say, if you are building like a second computer or anything like that, and you want the cheapest, and of course it will depend on the price, that you should buy this card. I wouldn't recommend this card even for esports games at anyone at this point. And I will say, if you are looking for a GPU and this is the only thing you can buy, then just save that money until you can buy something better, because you are going to regret it in the long run. And in the long run means like in 6 months from now, when you try to play anything other than, those esports games, and you find yourself not being able to play even at a decent quality, or a lowest quality. So yeah, unfortunately, this is the first time I have to say I do not recommend the 1050 Ti in 2024. It's just, it's not good enough. That's all I have to say. So having said that, I hope as always you like this video. and as always, see you on the next one.